On today's episode, how to make your kid a millionaire. Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is Choose FI. All right, guys, we're going to be diving into some really epic content today, discussing this concept of giving your children the tools they need to guarantee their path to financial independence, and maybe as another cool metric, a millionaire, how to reach that millionaire status. And we're going to be really referencing an article that was just published at choosefi.com. We'll have a link for you in the show notes, and we'll also give you an easier way to access it today as well. But I should just say, as a preface for that this has been an episode that Brad has been wanting to see exist in the universe for a very, very long time, and no one really did it in a satisfactory manner. So he went to the team and asked if we could help create this. So with that, Brad, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I'm doing quite well. Yeah, that was quite the setup, certainly. And you're right. I mean, I think when you first hear that, make your kid a millionaire, it sounds almost clickbaity, but it's almost a mathematical certainty. And like you said, it's about giving your kids the skills that they need, right? It's not about giving your kids $1 million or giving your kids anything necessarily. And we're obviously gonna go into that. But yeah, I'm
This
just
article could have been a
excited.
lot shorter if that was the takeaway. Just give it to them. Just give them $1
Just
million. You're done. It's easy.
hand them $1 million and you've made them a millionaire. That's great. But no, Ray on our team and Annie, they put together this amazing article. And yeah, Jonathan, we'll set up a shortcut for that, like you mentioned. What should we call it, do you think?
Well, Brad, I mean, I think we'll just probably make the audio episode and the video episode live on that page. So if someone wants to access the article and go back and watch the video podcast, they can just go to choosefi.com/319. We'll make that happen. But Brad, I mean, obviously my throwaway statement around just give it to them, no big deal. I think all of us kind of have this realization that if we do that, yeah, in the short term, we achieve the objective, but we probably ruin them. Likely, if that was the scenario, there's no knowledge that's really been imparted, no life lessons. And, the whole making $1 million is the key to the success. I mean, it's that actual journey where you go through the process of finding out, how do I accrue wealth, not burn it?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think this is, I mean, for so many of us, right? Like this is the story of FI, right? For us, for most of us, it was make a lot of mistakes, right? Fumble along blindly until you find some information. In a lot of cases for us, it was finding the FI community. For me, it was finding Get Rich Slowly and Mr. Money Mustache and JL Collins. For a lot of people listening, it's amazingly, it's finding us, right? It's finding this community and learning that there is a better way, right? And that you don't have to spend all your money, that you can understand the power of compounding, right? Like what it means, how plausible it is to become a millionaire over a 15, 20, 30-year period of time, right? Like what you have to put away each month to make that doable, right? So many of us, again, I think so many of us shut down when we hear large numbers. I constantly rag on Susie Orman a little bit here with her, to retire, you need $10 million. Well, I'm not going to ever have $10 million. Jonathan, in all likelihood, you might not have $10 million, right? But like that, where you've got a funny look on your
I
face.
do. I
Maybe
want to
you have
interrupt
different
you so bad,
aspirations
just
than I do.
because it's worth it. I promise. There's a payoff here. I sent a message to you and Ed just earlier this week. Susie Orman it has just dropped. Apparently, someone in our community shared this with us. Has dropped a course on how to reach financial independence. And I tell our audience, like, I'm going to give you a secret. You don't need to take the course. Here's the secret: just work until you're 140 years old. Like that's it. According to, you'll be able to reach the number that Susie thinks you need to hit. And with total financial security, just work till you're 140. You don't need to take the course, but I'll give you the link just in case.
Oh, that's well, yeah. So for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, Susie Orman famously appeared on Paula Pan's Afford Anything podcast and essentially said she despises the financial independence community and concept. So it's somewhat ironic that she's now touting a paid product for to become financially independent. So it's somewhat ridiculous. And to me, again, going back to mindset, I think so much of this journey comes back to mindset. And when you believe something is possible, when you believe that your own agency can make your life better, then you are emboldened to make change, right? That is why people listen to this podcast. That's why people sign up for the newsletter. That's why people join the Facebook page, because they see people making changes in their lives that are making them better. And that is inspiring, right? And when you see that, when you believe that you can make change, then you start, right? And Jonathan, we've had a couple episodes in a row now on life hacks and 1% better. And it truly does start with those 1%. It starts with little things. And then your life just magically, kind of jokingly, magically gets better, right? Like you start compounding these things. And again, maybe in a couple months' time, you're going to see a little improvement, but damn, if over 10, 15, 20 years, like you are going to wake up and be wildly wealthy because of individual changes you made. And I mean, we've talked about this over and over again. Even again on episode 318, we talked about just the difference in me driving old cars is going to be a nearly $750,000 decision in my lifetime just for driving old cars. It's not like I'm walking places, right? Like I'm not hitchhiking. I'm just driving a slightly more used car than most people are driving. So it's cool when you can rethink this to, hey, what would it take to become wealthy? What would it take to become financially independent? What would it take to reclaim my time? And again, I think that is the most empowering message you could ever come up with.
Yeah, I agree on the empowerment. And I think then it's time to kind of stretch the tactics that we talk about and apply it to that young mind, right? And to that different age bracket than we normally focus on. Most of us think about our investing timeline as 30 to 45 years. That's typically what we talk about in terms of, what you could expect. And a lot of these trajectories and where you'll be are based around 30 to 45 years. But most of us kind of think about that in terms of starting at the age of, 20 as an adult, maybe a young adult, but an adult, out in the world making their own financial decisions. What does it look like? How early could you really get started if you understood the framework or the rules and you took this message of empowerment and you applied it to, an individual that's willing to take action being guided by their parent? So Brad, I think, you talked a little bit about, I think I'd like to go farther with this. Why plan for retirement at such a young age? They have their entire life ahead of them. They've got their 20s and their 30s and their 40s to break stuff and figure it out and do better. Why start planning or having these conversations with your children at such a young age?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's a dual prong thing. I think actually planning for retirement might be like a slight variation on the conversation that I would personally have. So I think I would couch it under the concept of we're going to use a retirement vehicle. And obviously I'd explain this in words that my kids would understand. I wouldn't use retirement vehicle, but
Do you see this
we're
hot
gonna
rod car? This is the vehicle. We don't want the station wagon. We want the hot rod because that's not going to make it on the loop to loop.
Yep. So, you know, I think to me, and again, Jonathan, I love your input on this. Like to me, I think one of like the biggest kind of misdirections or one of the biggest misses, frankly, about saving money generally, whether we're talking about for kids or for adults, even young adults or even people in their 30s, 40s, and beyond, like, is this concept of saving for retirement.
Mm.
Because it seems so far off. It seems like that future self, even if you love that fictional, that future self, like it's hard to spend your current life just around like catering to that 3-decade future you. Whereas, again, I think the concept of financial independence
Mm.
is what would get people to take action. That concept of you can control your time, you have autonomy to make decisions. And I think we use retirement vehicles. And again, those are, that's a very fancy way. And I hate using jargon, but that's a fancy way of just saying like things like your 401k, things like an IRA or a Roth IRA or, 457, 403B, right? Like there are all these incredible options that many of us have available. And you can put money in there, whether this is, Jonathan, for retirement at 70, 59 and a half, or an early retirement, right? Like there are strategies to get that money out. So I think for me, the concept of, hey, let's plan for retirement, like that's almost beside the point. But I think it's important to know that, like, man, we're going to take advantage of those retirement options. to the ends of the earth, right? Like that, those we're going to benefit from. Does that mental framework make sense to you?
I think you nailed it. Yeah, you reframed it. Nobody wants to plan for retirement. Even people in their 40s and 50s don't really want to plan for retirement. It's just like a word that's more accessible and sounds more in reach, and it feels like it's what's supposed to be the next thing. But no 20-year-old wants to plan for retirement, and certainly no 8-year-old, 7-year-old, teenager is even, that word isn't even on their radar. What we might be willing to do is to plan out our life, right? And financial independence is a better framework for talking about what do you want to do with your life? How do you want to give yourself as many options as possible? How do you want to take whatever strings, a system has on you to, do X, Y, Z, remove those to give yourself an unlimited option to choose from. That's why I think you're right. First thing is, like, let's lose the term retirement. No parent should go in talking to their kids about how they're going to have enough money when they're 65. They don't care. They'll never care. I still don't care right now. I'm planning for intermediate time periods. I'm planning for my life. My life does not include even the word retirement, to be honest with you. I might not be working, but the retirement isn't something that means it. It's just, what am I doing at this particular stage of my life? Well, whatever brings me the most joy, because I've unlocked options. And yeah, 100% Brad, you nailed that. And you also, I think, were right to point out, okay, we're planning for our life. We want to give ourselves the best chance to have as many options as possible. What are the tools that give us that? We got to look at what's out there. And the framework, the system that we're all working inside has a few that can aid our desire for more options. And some of those are retirement planning tools. And so, yeah, some of these conversations at some point are going to include that. And so, Brad, in this article that we're referencing, which you can find at choosefy.com/319, they put a lot of emphasis early on the Roth IRA. And I'd be curious, from your perspective as a former accountant and lifelong Excel nerd, why the Roth IRA?
Yeah, so this is, I think, to me, and this is why I wanted to see this article come into existence, is that there's never been a great explanation of how people can take advantage of children who have earned income being able to contribute to a Roth IRA. And Jonathan, you and I have mentioned this very much in passing over, maybe 2 or 3 times over 400 plus episodes. And it's always been one of those things that, like, I think is this amazing potential life hack, if you will, that if you Google around for this, like, no real phenomenal resource exists for it. So we wanted to put it into the world, basically. So the key here is that, most kids who are 10, 11, 12 years old don't have a job that enables them to contribute to a 401k, right? Or a 403b or 457. Most of the different options are simply unavailable for them. So if they have some money that they've saved, whether through jobs or through presents or whatever it may be, like, their options are very, very limited. But the one incredible option that they do have available is the Roth IRA. So, Jonathan, as you know, Roth IRA is an after-tax contribution. So this would be an after-tax contribution that they made, and the money then grows tax-free forever. It can be pulled out in the future. If we're talking about like a 12-year-old, theoretically, let's even just assume normal distribution, they can access it at 59 and a half. So you're talking 47 and a half years of compounding, which is truly remarkable. And we'll certainly show some examples of that later in the episode here. But I think that's the key, is that this is in a vehicle that grows. Again, it's tax free because that money has been taxed up front. And that's a separate issue, which we can also refer to. That's in the article a little bit. There's some nuance there, and clearly this show is not tax or investing advice. So obviously you have to look into your own situation. I know I hate giving disclaimers, but it's very important that we give that disclaimer.
Absolutely. Nobody would look to this show for tax or investing advice. I don't even know why you would be here. Like Susie Orman, no. Probably. I don't know.
Sorry. but yeah, so that's, that is almost like, we'll put that to the side, regardless. That's something you need to look into for yourself as far as like the requirements for taxation for that earned income, et cetera. But we can talk about the real meat of this, right? Which is, so this money has already been taxed, and then it grows tax free forever. So you're not paying, if this was in a regular investment account, even if your child had the wherewithal, or you taught them and it was in a regular investment account, they all of the dividends and capital gains distributions over those intervening 47 and a half years and beyond, those would be taxable, right? And the sales, when you went to sell it, 40, 50 plus years later, the any over what you bought it for, that's a capital gain. It's subject to capital gains tax as well. So this cuts all of that out. It just compounds tax free, and when you pull it out, tax free also, because it's in a Roth IRA. So, Jonathan, that to me is the reason why, like, this is a remarkable thing. So clearly there's lots of like lessons that we can talk about teaching your kid, but for the actual mechanics, it's, if you have earned income, you can put that money into a Roth IRA. You can put up to that money. And we will talk about that also. That's an important distinction. But let's say you earn $5,000 of earned income, you can put $5,000 into a Roth IRA. So the current limit for Roth IRAs is $6,000 a year. Uh, and that's always, that it seems to go up every couple of years. So you need to keep abreast of that, certainly. But yeah, that's the cool thing here is earned income, and it can go into a Roth IRA, which then compounds and grows for decades, multiple decades, tax free.
So, as you're saying this, I think it's really, people hearing that are probably getting very excited about the Roth IRA and like, well, my goodness, I've heard a lot of episodes that you guys have done and you haven't like leaned into the Roth. I mean, you've definitely talked about it, but you haven't talked about it as the first place that we go to invest. I think it's important to really consider the distinction between an adult that is making maybe a median income, maybe an above median income, maybe a high income that has a high marginal tax rate versus, a 14 or 15-year-old. So, Brad, why don't you just discuss why the Roth for this particular age bracket and income bracket has so much appeal?
Yeah, well, like you said, and I think the starting place is that adult case in point, right? So we have long said, and there are legitimate debates, and obviously this always comes down to personal preference and what your situation is. This is not blanket advice, certainly, but so yeah, we have long said that really it's control what you can control. That's a phrase that we've used over and over here. And I think one of those things that you have much more control over than you otherwise would have thought is your tax rate and your tax liability. And I think a lot of that control comes from being able to contribute to pre-tax retirement accounts. Most of us, many of us have 401ks. We talked again, about 403bs, 457s. The Millionaire educator, Jonathan, in episode 13, was it? Talked about this, and that's an amazing case study. And then you have options like HSAs. You have traditional IRAs if you qualify. So there are lots of ways to just lower your total taxable income, which is, again, that's at your highest marginal tax rate. So there's a huge benefit to you for contributing to those pre-tax retirement accounts, especially when you're making a lot of money. There's a significant benefit. So my bias is to always try to max those out as much as possible. I think that's kind of keeps with that ethos of control what you can control, and you're getting a significant benefit. And then, we talk about real in-depth strategies like the Roth IRA conversion ladder, which is way beyond the scope of this. You can Google that, or we search on our website. We have tons of resources on that, where you could potentially pull that money out tax and penalty free, even though you put it into pre-tax. So again, way beyond the scope of this episode, but man, there's some cool options. So that's why I think that's the best for many adults. But then we're talking about kids here, and this is the option that they're able to contribute to. So this is, not only is it is really the only game in town, which, in and of itself by definition is the impetus to do it, but again, you're talking about that compounding, that tax-free compounding for those decades. I mean, goodness, that's crazy. And again, then we get into the territory that's a little harder to talk about with the blanket statements about, the tax filing requirements for kids and, do they have to file their own return? Does some of the income go on parents' returns? Uh, that's a separate issue. But I think if they are filing their own return, then I think what you were getting at with this is that their income is going to be is going to be tiny, right? It's only going to be a couple $1,000s. So their tax rate is going to be significantly lower. So just from like a normal standpoint of the Roth IRA decision point, I think this is the more pertinent topic because again it's kind of hard to talk specifics, but for adults, when you're talking about like, hey, what's the decision point between a Roth IRA and a traditional? Well, if you're at a low tax bracket, a low marginal tax bracket, because let's say your income is low this year or whatever it may be, you could make a strong argument that would be the argument to contribute to a Roth IRA then, because you're paying the tax on it, right? We say it's after tax money, but you're paying a tiny little tax rate. So of course you'll lock that in because who the heck knows what the tax rate's going to be in a couple decades when you go to take that money out. So I think that degree of certainty gives a lot of people just some real satisfaction that they can lock that in. So I think that to me, that's kind of like the overall thought process here.
Yeah, and I just, in terms of the only game in town, when we say the only game in town in terms of retirement vehicles, we're talking about, they don't have access to a 401k, right? They have access to the IRAs and they can pick between a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. Those are their two options. So do you want it to be pre-tax or do you want to go in post-tax? Because of the relatively low marginal tax bracket that they will find themselves in, because again, to Brad's point, you're probably talking about a sum of money between $500 and $6,000 on probably the very, very high end. The relatively low sum of money that they're going to be earning, it is going to be likely in their best interest to just go ahead and pay the small amount of tax that will be owed on that and get that into a vehicle where it is then sheltered from tax for the rest of their life, the rest of their life. So if we kind of say that's kind of table stakes and that's why we're talking about it, we then need to actually talk about what does earned income actually look like? And most of us think about like our allowances. And this is a big thing to say that allowances do not count towards earned income. So you cannot pay your child for making their bed 50 cents a day, 50 cents a week, whatever it is, and have that, add up to be that amount. There is some clauses in here if you really wanted to push the limits. And Ray really dug into this when he was putting this article together. If you can establish that you are going to hire someone to perform reasonable duties such as cleaning the house, mowing the lawn, then potentially there are rooms. But now you're talking about a gray period. You probably are going to want to work, with an accountant to establish a framework for that. But aside from that, because we're trying to, all right, no allowances, no. There are I was hiring, this landscaping company to mow my lawn though, and now I'm paying them instead. All right, you got your paperwork filed. Okay, I got it. That so there is you could push the limits there, but as your child gets older, and now we're talking about them potentially working outside of the home, there is some narrowly defined, scopes of work that you could have them consider doing that you could feel pretty confident about that would then fall into these categories. And just to kind of inspire some ideas, I'll read a couple of these off to you, like babysitting, delivering newspapers, mowing lawns for other families. So in contrast to mowing your own yard, you're actually talking about mowing lawns for other families. Be doing some sort of actor or model type role. So photography, or working for a parental owned business. So, you are an entrepreneur, you've set up a business, great. You've already laid the groundwork to have a phenomenal platform to hire your child inside your business doing an age appropriate scope of work. Now, and I'll give us all back to Brad just to comment on, but I should say we're talking about various age brackets, right? Because these kind of work at different levels. When your child reaches the age of 14, at that age, they are able to work under certain conditions with public and private companies, which would put them under the standard tax code. So not every company is going to hire a 14-year-old, but there may be those that have done this before or can dig into this. It then does become legal. Child labor laws would then allow this, and it probably will have some forms that would need to be filled out ahead of time. That's just kind of, I think it's really important. We did a lot of non-specifics earlier. I think it's really important to provide you guys just with a general framework for how could you creatively look through some of the ideas listed to then maybe, come up with your own that would then fall under under these general guidelines. Brad, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that was a really good overview. And I would say the most obvious is just a regular job, right? Let's say they're 13, 14, 15 years old. And, I'm not sure the specifics of how old you have to be in certain states, but let's say you work at McDonald's or whatever, or just, any type of store, your local grocery store. If I mean that's real income, right? I know my kids are going to be, or my older daughter intends to be an assistant swim or a junior swim coach in a couple of years. So that'll be some money she earns over the summer. So obviously any type of real job, if you will, quote unquote, that they're getting paid for, like that's the most obvious one. So you get into some, like you said, Jonathan, a gray area when it's for your own company. And I think people need to be really careful of not just like making up fictional income here. Obviously, this should be legitimate expenses that if you were going to pay somebody else, you could potentially hire your child to do it. So, I would certainly make sure you dot I's and cross T's, and make sure you document that this is real work that's been done. So that's very, very important. So I think where this all kind of ties in then is, okay, so you have this earned income, right? You've calculated how much income have they earned for that year, and then what can go into the Roth IRA, and what money does it have to be? And I think this is actually an important nuance, but it can make an enormous difference. So hypothetically, and actually this is what Ray put in the article here, is let's say we have Johnny. So he actually starts mowing lawns at the age of 9. He's a very enterprising little kid, and he made $4,000 that first year
Wow.
in earned income. So yeah, pretty busy kid.
Crushing
And
it.
yeah, that's amazing. So let's say, the Johnny and his parents decide, okay, $3,000 is going into a Roth. And I very specifically didn't say 3,000 of that, right? $3,000 is going into a Roth. So there's a bunch of different things you can do to get that money in, right? So obviously the most clear one is Johnny can take 3,000 of that 4,000 and just contribute it to his Roth, right? Uh, Another option you could say, and this is the important nuance, is it doesn't have to be that exact money. It doesn't have to be the exact dollars that Johnny earned. It's just that because he did earn $4,000 in that calendar year, a $4,000 contribution can be made to his Roth IRA. So that means the parents could contribute it, right? The grandparents could contribute it, or the grandparents could give the money to Johnny and can contribute it. It doesn't have to be the exact dollars that Johnny earned. Does that make sense, Jonathan? Because this is really important that people understand this.
Massive point. I mean, we're talking, it could be a matching program. It gives you a ton of flexibility just to realize that money can be used twice, basically. I mean, it can go to two different purposes. That's the key to what we're trying to get across here.
Right. Like, so for instance, let's say you wanted to do something fun, because again, we're trying to make our kid a millionaire here, right? And a lot of that comes down to lessons. So let's say we want to do a matching program, which is awesome that you brought that up. So let's say, okay, Johnny, you put in $1,000 of your 4,000 that you earned. You get to keep the other three. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to match that then 2 for 1. Okay. So if you put in 1,000, I'm going to put in 2,000 of my own money as the parent. And then the 3,000 goes in. We could have done a 3 for 1 match, Jonathan, but I guess we're being a little stingy here. So $3,000 goes in. But again, Johnny's money is separate, right? He only took 1,000 of his 4. He gets to keep that other 3, but we're teaching him financial lessons here in this hypothetical of, hey, we want to incentivize you putting money away. It's very similar to what companies do with a 401k match, right? Like, we are incentivizing you to put in money, and we're going to match it. They're not going to match it at 200 or 300%, obviously, but they usually give a couple percent, which is free money. So I mean, this is teaching Johnny these type of incentives of, hey, don't pass this up. This is the best return you're ever going to get. So again, that's putting $3,000 in, but the parents putting 2 of it in, and Johnny put in 1,000. there's still room for an extra thousand because he earned 4,000. So all of these kind of conceptual framework here, this is what's important to get across.
Yeah. I mean, so we're going to just do some basic compound math calculations and just time value of money calculations here. But we don't want you to gloss by that and miss that. This is a wonderful opportunity for you to incentivize saving through conversation. Think of mom and dad, right? It's just, there's all sorts of variance on how much you do there, but just know it's based on the earned income. So you could do up to 4,000. All right. So from wherever the source. So let's just really focus in on just one time value of money calculation, Brad, for Johnny here. So Johnny, if he were to take 3,000 of that original 4,000 that he earned, or 3,000, that's how much him and his parents collectively in some combination, we don't really know. They actually were to fund that Roth IRA account with $3,000 that first year at 9, and then just never touch it again. Let's just start there. They do it the 1 year. Johnny doesn't want to mow the next year. He's like, $4,000 of lawn mowing. That was way too, like, no, not doing that again. But that's it. But that 1 year, they just knocked it out of the park. What if we were to do a time value of money calculation out to more of a traditional retirement age?
Yeah, we put this into a compound interest calculator, and yeah, if he put in that 3K at 9 years old and didn't touch it until he was 64, which is pretty standard retirement age for most people, he'd have almost $124,000 from just contributing that one time. So I mean, that in and of itself shows you just the power of compounding, just from not from making tens upon tens of thousands of contributions, but just that one $3,000 contribution is going to get him 12.4% of the way to this $1 million goal, which is pretty cool.
I mean, it's really starting early and having that working for him. If you were to supplement that with just, I don't know, as little as $1,500 a year, which we're talking now like $100 a month, just a little bit over $100 a month, for the rest of his, investing lifetime. That is going to get him to a millionaire status. But it probably could have started just with something as simple as that early childhood lesson where we just learned, we overly incentivize getting money into that savings account. And so $1,500 a year is all that Johnny needed to come up with for the rest of his investing timeline to basically assure that he's going to be a millionaire at retirement. And the reason I wanted to point that out is when we don't have this money lesson, when we have the lost decade that, so many of us encounter, where we don't start realizing how important this conversation is until we've gone to college, we've had the student loan debt, we've paid it off, we've gotten that first or second job, we finally paid off, the second car, the first car. Now we're like, all right, it's probably time to get serious. I'm in my 30s now. I feel like maybe I should start taking this a little bit more seriously. Brad, what would be like for that person that's starting at zero at that age in their early 30s? How much would they need to invest, on an annual basis to be able to get a somewhat similar response to, or similar result to what Johnny just got?
Yeah. So I guess let's say you started saving at 31, which it's a pretty reasonable time for most people to start saving, and you maxed out your Roth IRA contribution. So we'll just say it's $6,000 a year. It does go up in all likelihood, but it's safer to say it's 6,000. So you're putting 6,000 a year, and you're contributing every year from 31 to 64. So now Johnny, remember, is going to have over $1 million, 1,050,000 basically, for just putting in a quarter of that, in essence, right? $1,500 a year. But you had to max out. You had to put in 4 times $6,000 a year from 31 to 64, and you at the end of it will have 764,000. So you actually have a full quarter less
Yeah.
than what Johnny had, right around there, which 25% less money in your pot of this net worth here in your Roth IRA, and you had to contribute 4 times. You had to contribute the full 6,000. So I think that is but one example of the power of compounding and the power of time, right? Because if you think about it, and it looks like in this article we use 7% for the annual growth rate. And I think we Jonathan generally use 8% on the show, but I think 7% in all honesty is probably it's a little more conservative, and who knows what the future will bring. So I'm fine with that as an example. But if you use, and again, I don't want to get into jargon here, but there's a concept called the rule of 72. And it basically just kind of tells you how often, how quickly your money is going to double based on the interest rate that you could expect to earn. So really, really simply, you just take the number 72 and you divide it by your expected interest rate, and that gets you the number of years to double. So just really simply, we'll say on average here we're talking 10 years, right? 72 divided by 7 comes out to 10 and a little bit of change. So your money would double in 10 years. And now that's really important, right? Because Johnny in this example is starting at 9, whereas the adult who's starting at 31, that's 31 minus 9, we're talking 22 extra years. So even at that 7%, we're saying it's going to double twice extra Johnny's getting. He's getting 2 extra doubles of this money. So that's the critical piece here. So that's kind of just a cool mental framework to think about when you're contemplating your own investments, right? So like if you have $1 million at 40, you would expect that to double. Again, if you're expecting a 7% return, you'd expect that to double every 10 years. So at 50, you'd have 2 million. At 60, you'd have 4. At 70, you'd have 8. This is it. It's kind of cool to think about that, right? And I've seen articles about how like Warren Buffett's uh, his net worth, it was, it's backloaded like that too. And obviously there are other factors, but it's cool when you think about compounding on a big number. It 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 adds up pretty quick. So yeah, that's yet again kind of another one of these lessons that you can teach your child as part of this entire exercise is it really pays to put money in as early as possible and watch that compound. So I mean, I would probably make the argument to Johnny, if you can put in that full 6,000, if there's some way to get that earned income, I mean, you could contribute just for a handful of years, probably from 9 to 20, and never have to contribute again. And I suspect, though I haven't run the numbers, I suspect his net worth would be higher than had he just put in that 1,500 for that entire time.
Right. And the most important part of all of this is that it's going to require communication between parent and child. And the conversations that should be included is likely in some capacity trying to incentivize that front loading of income into a retirement vehicle. Maybe try to frame it more like a hot rod, less like a station wagon. But you know, the conversations that are going to be underpinning that, or just one contribution makes an impact when you have time on your side. And we have a different scenarios inside this article of people doing this at different ages to help foster these conversations so you can truly communicate that to your child. But just one contribution makes an impact when you have time on your side, and small contributions over time make an impact as well. So what we were trying to do is we're trying to incentivize them to break through the resistance of just getting started, and maybe get through your own personal resistance of going through the trouble to help them start this, but just get it started, recognizing that just you getting it started is likely immediately going to add an additional 100,000, several $100,000 onto their retirement number, just because you took the time to have that initial conversation, make that setup, force that first contribution, and they'll benefit for the rest of their life. And then how do we build on that? It's a much easier conversation once you've done that to start layering on these small contributions over time. That system took a little bit of friction to get that in place. Now you have a system. Now you can start working on reinforcing these habits. It's a much easier ask. And one of the things that you're doing, regardless of your own means and financial background, by having this conversation, we're allowing our child to build their own trust fund. We don't want trust fund babies. We want kids that can build trust funds for themselves and for their next generation. I mean, think about how that changes their options as an adult. How do they really, and we don't need to worry about what are they going to do with the silver spoon, because they made their own silver spoon. They're a creator, not a consumer, almost by definition. The psychological component, Brad, this is something that you lean on all the time. The psychology of teaching your kids early about investing, it's hard to put a price tag on that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And yeah, I mean, they then are set up to make good decisions. All those intervening years when a lot of us were just fumbling around in the darkness, just trying to figure this out on our own. And a little bit of knowledge, then again, it's compounding, right? Like then they're prepared the next time they learn or they somebody's talking about something financially related, they at least have a foundation, right? And then it probably increases the likelihood that they're going to understand that and want to learn that next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And it all just compounds on each other. So yeah, I mean, I think getting started here early, as early as possible. And realistically, it might not be possible for everybody out there to set up their kids for life here, but it doesn't have to be okay. I've got to put every dollar of their earned income in a Roth IRA because Justify said. I mean that's clearly not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the lessons are priceless, and you obviously have to figure out what your life situation looks like, right? Like in this example of Johnny, like okay, maybe Johnny can only put in or only wants to put in a couple $100 of his own money that year, and you can't match it at all. Okay, that's very realistic for most people, right? And if you can match, then wonderful, you get to teach another lesson. But if not, it doesn't mean this is all for naught or you shouldn't do it. Clearly, it's just okay. That's the reality now, and I think then what's the next lesson you can teach? I think that's what I'm and Jonathan, obviously, I'm far from a perfect parent, but like that's what I'm always looking for with my kids is like, what's that next age appropriate lesson I can teach them to get them interested, to get them thinking about money as a tool and not just something to spend frivolously.
Yeah, and as you start to think about what are the lessons that my child are learning, and as they're going through these different age brackets, really the psychology of money, as you start thinking about a young mind, there's some very age specific lessons that they're going to be able to grasp and they're going to be handle, and they're going to be able to do it in a much more well balanced and comprehensive way because you're fostering these conversations. This article actually takes the time to kind of break down a few of those lessons at various age brackets, but the one that really strikes me for all of us is that when our children are earning money, they are not earning money for subsistence, right? They're not earning money for survival. Not only would that be illegal, basically at that point, but they are earning money hopefully from a place of privilege. So we need to then, if we're going to reinforce this, it's not for survival. It's going to be really helpful for us to start looking at this as an opportunity to teach them time value of money, right? Time is your most precious non-renewable resource. And so if we can start to help them make associations between their time and the money they're earning, then it starts to allow us to establish this idea of reaching and going for financial independence as a worthy goal. And so you are going to need to think about this through the age that they are and help them, work through that. But what a fantastic platform to do that when we're talking about this idea of making your kid a millionaire. So just consider this article a springboard. I think you need to spend more time just going through this article, thinking through the concepts, how it applies to your children. If you want a much more, a larger framework outside of this, I would highly recommend that you take a look at the book Raising a Money Savvy Family for Next Generation Financial Independence. That was written by Nords and Carol and through Choosify Publishing. It is an absolutely phenomenal just framework for having these conversations at all ages. And you can find that at choosify.com/books. Or again, just using this article as a framework, just go to choosify.com/319. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.